In today's video, we're going to be continuing from where we stopped in our last video in CSS by replicating this contact form. So here's a preview of what we're going to be building. We're going to be building this contact form using HTML and CSS, although there's a little bit of JavaScript in here. I got it from Front-End Mentor. So let's get started. So while we set up our project, I would love to let you know that this is GENIX-JS, a YouTube channel dedicated to teaching you all you need to know to get started with front-end web development. So the first thing we're going to do to replicate our contact form is you click on the start button and then you type VS Code. So VS Code is an IDE for writing programs. So if you don't have it installed, there's a link in the description below to get it installed. So the first thing I'm going to be doing now, the next thing is to click on new window. So it's going to open up this window for you. So now, in order for us to get started creating our contact form, the first thing we need to do is open a folder. So we don't have any folder yet installed. We don't have any folder set up for this project. So I would love you to click on this Explorer and then click open folder. So after you've done that, go to the directory where you want your file to be stored. So I have this CSS tutorial here. So the first thing I'm just going to be doing is creating a new folder. So to create a new folder, you right click and then you see new here and then folder. Now we're going to name this CSS contact form. Alright, so now once you click on enter, you can select the folder and then it opens up for you. So now we have our empty folder. You can just close this welcome. So now what we're doing here is we're replicating the sign up, the contact form. So I'm just going to put this to the left and then we have the contact form to the right. So now this is our contact form. I'll zoom in a little. So this is how it looks. So remember in our last tutorial we talked about HTML. We spoke about HTML can be used to structure the web page. So the very first thing we'll be doing is to create our index.html file. But while we do this, let me just zoom out. While we do this, we have to consider what exactly we're going to be building here, what exactly we are trying to replicate here. So to understand how our HTML will be structured. So alright, so we can close this. So now let's look at it. Our contact form has a title, it has an input field, it has another input field here, and then this input field are grouped together, right? And then we have this email address field, and then we have this another field here with some select buttons, and then we have this message input field, and then we have this checkbox and then our submit button. So this is technically a form. I know we've not talked about forms, but we'll be using this very interesting project to discuss forms and how you can style forms and also validate them as we go on in this series. So the first thing, as usual, is to create your HTML boilerplate. So to do that, we have a shortcut, but I'm just going to type it down for the sake of those that are new to this channel. So doc type HTML. So this .html basically defines your HTML. I have a link in the description below explaining all this in my first video that I made. So now the head, and inside here we have the title. So we can name this CSS contact form, right? CSS contact form. And then after here, the next thing to do is the body. And inside the body you can put a comment saying the contact form content. Right, so now that's it. So after we create this, we're going to come here again and then click here and create our CSS file. So to do that, in our last video we spoke about how to create CSS file and different types of CSS. We have the external CSS, which is what we're going to be using in this video. So you click on that and then you've created your CSS file. So after you create your CSS file, the next thing to do is to link your CSS file to your HTML file. So to do that, let me close. So you can just come down here and then, no, sorry, not here. It's going to be in the head because the head contains information about your website. So link, and then inside link we have reference, right? Rel, rel, yes, and then we have style sheet. So you don't have to cram this. Basically, it's just a normal it's just how CSS are linked to HTML elements. There's a shortcut also. So href, and then the link to where your style sheet is. So remember what I said about this same directory files, you just use a single full stop. So let's get straight to what we have in for today. So now that we have our HTML and CSS files set up, what are we going to do? Basically, you can't style anything without the content. You can't style a website without the structure. So we're going to start by creating our wrapper. So the wrapper is created using divs. So now we have a div, which is a generic container, as spoken in the last video, and then we can give it an ID, which we spoke about, also identifiers. Call this wrapper. So this wrapper basically wraps up every single thing that we have inside here, and it's the wrapper that also have this background color of green. Then the contact form is going to be inside the wrapper, right? Let's continue. So now to create a form in HTML, there's a form tag. Right? So that form tag basically it represents a collection of form associated elements. So a form is just like you're giving a registration form to fill. So basically online you also have things like sign up form. So that's what a form is for. So inside this form now you can see we have a title, but basically this title is not going to be inside this form. So we have to create another wrapper to wrap up the form itself and the title, which is going to be this card that we have around here with the background of white. So the form basically is this input and this button with all this, while the title is this. So now we're going to give this a div. No, let's give it main, or let's just give it section, right? It's a section inside the whole page according to how we spoke of semantic HTML. Or let's give it main since it's the only content we're having on this web page. So I have a link, there's a link in the description below leading to my video on semantic HTML. Okay, so now that we've created our main, we can give this main a class of main, right? We can use the tag name, but let's just give it of main. So now what are we going to have inside our main? Firstly, we're going to have this. So this looks very small. It's not really like an h1. Let's zoom in. Remember, we must not have an h2 without an h1, but I mean in this case this is very small, so we can still put our h1 and reduce the size using CSS. So let's just put contact us. So now we can give this a class, or no, let's give it an ID. It's the only h1 we have, so we'll just give it contact form heading, right? Contact form heading. So now we can give this one also an ID of contact form itself, the contact form. So this is the contact form heading and this is the contact form, right? So let's continue. So now in order for us to create this form, remember we have inputs, and then we have some radio buttons, and then we have message. So in this video we're going to be focusing on the HTML aspect. So now the first thing we're going to be doing is, now form, this is in a group, this is a form group, this is another form group. So we have what we call field sets, but then this field sets is another type of HTML element that groups in different fields, different form fields. So now I'm going to create a field set. So basically a field set has what we call legend, right? So now this legend basically is the title of that field set, what the field set is representing. So now in this place you can see that we have two field sets inside this particular place. So the legend of this is going to be name, but then that name is going to be the label. Let me explain. So field sets, you see, represent a set of form controls optionally grouped under a common name. You can see, so basically this is grouped under a common name, right? We have first name, we have last name. So the field set name, the legend name for this is going to be name. We just put name for it, right? Name. So stay with me. So now inside this field set we have another element called the input, right? But each input represents different types of form inputs, such as text, radio buttons, checkboxes, even buttons as well, and also other like file selectors, color pickers, date selectors, number selectors, and all those things. But here we are only concerned with name, that's text, and email. Radio buttons, text area, this is called a text area, and a checkbox with a button. So now let's just create the basic structure of that. So the first thing we'll do now is, so this input as an attribute, as we spoke of in the last video, we have HTML elements having attributes. So this input as an attribute known as, we have text. So that's for the first name, text. And then we have another input. Let's just create it inside this field set, which has a legend of name, remember. So we can click on enter text by default, right? So now that's this field set, that's for this field set. So now the second field set is, oh no, this is not a field set. The second one is just an input, right? So we're just going to put input, right? And then what does it say? Email address. So we're going to put email address. So you should only use field sets when you have more than one input fields under a common name, which is name, but this one is the only one. This one also will be inside a field set, right? So let's continue. So now we created email, right? So now before we continue, there's something we call label. So label basically is what that particular input is specifying. So we have label, and then what do we have here? We have first name, right? So we can now put first name here and space it, first name. Same thing for this, we'll put label, and then we'll put last name, right? So now before we continue, also there are other attributes inside this input that basically makes the form very interactive, such as the ID. So the ID is basically an identifier for this particular form, text. So what is this form, this input for? This input is for first name, so we can put first name. And then this label is for what? Is for the input. So there's another attribute called for, and then it's for this first name also. And then when we run this, you'll see the difference, but let's just add it for this as well. Same thing here. So we have for, we have first name, right? And then here we have ID, we have first name, right? So that's all for this field set, right? This field set. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is to do the same for this email label. And this email, according to what we have in the design, we have email address, and here just follow me through, we have for, and inside for we have email address, and then we can have our ID here. We can say email address as well. So now what is the benefit of ID? So let's just open our page with live server. So I'm going to be opening my Chrome browser. So while I open my Chrome browser, right, I'll put this on full screen, right? So I'm going to go back to my VS Code and show you the usefulness of the ID. So if you don't have live server installed, kindly come to this place and just type live server, and to load up for you live server by retreat day. So basically this is it. So this is it. So just install it and you get running. So now right click, open with live server, and you see our form open up here. Good. So now this is our contacts form, right? So let me just put this to the right. Let's just put this to the right. All right, so these are the right already. Now let's compare everything we have. So we have our contact us as the same with the design. Then we have this name field set, you know, the first name and the last name, and then we have the email address, right? So if we put this to the left here and compare it to the design, you see that we're already replicating it pretty fine. Email address, first name, last name. So now let's continue, just minimize this and continue creating. So now the next thing is query type. So this is another field set, right? So field sets. So now the legend name of this one is going to be query type. So AI is helping me complete it. The name of the AI is tab9 AI, tab9 AI. So you can install it also by searching here and installing tab9. Okay, so now that we have the field set, we can create label. And then now to create a label for this kind of input, this is a radio button. So a radio button is basically a specific type of input element that allows you to select just one of many options. It's different from checkbox. Checkbox allows you to select different options, but radio button is for like a specific option, and this is a radio button, but to select only one of these. So to create a radio button, let's create our label first by saying general inquiry, right? And then we can create the input. So there's an input type. So input are self-closing tags as well, but let's go on. There's an input type, and this input type basically is radio, right? If we save that and we come back to our web page, you can see that we have general inquiry, same thing as here. So we're getting somewhere, and we have our legend, we have our field set. So let's continue. So now we have radio, and then we can add our HTML4 elements. For first we add our ID, sorry. So the ID is going to be equal to general query, right? Good. So now that's the ID for general query, and then the for also is going to be general query, same thing as the ID of that input, just for that. So now we can create the second one. So we have label, and then we have support request, right? So we have for support request, right? So now we have input, and then we have ID. So this is support request as well, right? And then the type radio, and then we close this up. So now that is that for this second one. So the next thing we're going to do now is to create this final message text area. So to create a text area, this is also another field set, right? So now field set can be seen as form field containers. So now to create a text area, we first have to add our legend, right? And inside this legend we have the message according to this place. So we say message, and then we have what we call text area, right? And then we can close this up. So now this is for the text area. Text area does not need a label, but you can give it an ID, a special identifier. So this identifier can hold the ID label message rather. So now let's look at what we have on our website, on our web page. So now you can see that everything from here to here has been created. So the next thing that we actually need to do now is to create the checkbox and the button, right? So now to create our checkbox is very easy. Since it's a single label, it's not a field set. So all we just have to do is create the input and then give it a type of checkbox, right? So checkbox is different from radio, and we'll get to that in a bit. So we'll give it a label, and then this label is going to be for the ID of checkbox, or yeah, checkbox, since it's the only checkbox we have. And then we can just write what we have here: I consent to being contacted by the team. So this will make a whole lot of sense when we style and add JavaScript. So now let's create our button. So when you're using forms, you can use either of these types of button. You can use the input element itself, which has a type of submit, or you can use a button. So we spoke of button, but it's safer to use the input since it is inside a form. So now we're going to give it a value. It has a value of submit. So that's all. So now the next thing that we're going to be doing, let's check our web page. Let's check our web page. So you can see that everything has been created. We have the contacts for us, we have the first name, last name, we have the email, we have the query type, we have the message, and then we have this checkbox, right, that is checking correctly, this that is ticking correctly. But then now you can see that these two are not supposed to tick since we're only selecting one. So to actually solve this problem, of ticking just one instead of two, so it's basically inside this place that you're going to do it. So now look at this very well. So this label or these inputs are supposed to have a common name, right? So what is the name? So the name basically represents a group of radio buttons. What do I mean? So you can have a radio button saying age group, and then that radio button name is going to be age group. So the radio button name here for each of these inputs, radio button name for each of these inputs is going to be query type, since that is what they are under. So the query type will be any of these two that the user selects. So query type, that's going to be the same thing for here, query type. So to break this down, basically the name just basically specifies a certain, it's an identifier for whatever the user selects. So if the user selects general query inquiry, it's going to print out general inquiry, that's what will be selected. Or if the user selects support request, it's a support request that will be selected, right? So now if we save and we go back to our web page, you can see now that it actually selects just one, because this is the query type I selected, this is the query type. So that name just adds an identifier for selecting just one, and it's used for radio buttons. You can add it for checkbox, but checkbox are ideal for numerous selections. So that's all about our HTML. So the next thing we need to do now is to start styling.